Hi, everyone. Welcome to Textile Talks. I'm Haley Butler. I'm the communications coordinator for the International Quilt Museum, and we have a great program for you here today. While everybody's getting checked in, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can acknowledge our sponsors and just give you some other few bits of information. So while we gather, I'm going to promote our sponsors here. And today we have a presentation on Quilt National, Then and Now. Next week's Textile Talk will be a curator talk, Quilt Making and Sustainability, a virtual exhibition with Laura Hopper, presented by the Quilt Alliance. Textile Talks would not be here without you and without individual donations. The total amount to run Textile Talks is over $42,000. Sponsorships cover a lot of that, but we do need your help funding the rest. If you enjoy today's talk or any textile talk, consider making a donation. Lucy is going to place a link in the chat if you'd like to donate to help offset the cost of this production. Now today, I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn Ducey, Artist B. James Curator of Collections at the International Quilt Museum, to get our program started. If you have any questions about today's program, we encourage you to type them into the Q&A function, and we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can by the end of the chat. So with that, let's welcome Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm really excited about this program. We have some amazing speakers who are joining us today. And we're going to kind of introduce people as we move through these different segments. First of all, I am really happy to have Leah Madgery join us today. Leah is the Executive Director of the Dairy Barn Arts Center in Athens, Ohio. She is a community leader and museum professional with over 13 years of nonprofit experience. Her background with a degree in museum studies is in leadership and fundraising as the past director of donor relations at Marietta College. Her museum work includes creative program development for all ages and abilities, fundraising, and exhibition management. Community access to art is her passion and expertise, and the Dairy Barn is a perfect outlet for her creativity. Thank you for being here, Leah.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Carolyn, and for pronouncing my last name perfectly well.
I'm stumbling over everything else, but I got your name. But yeah, the Dairy Barn is such an amazing organization, and they have been sponsoring Quilt National now, or hosting Quilt National since 1979, which is really an amazing run. And it's really one of the most important exhibitions that's held that features the studio art quilt genre.
Yeah, and it's always really fun, an exhibition to see because it's very well attended. It's by far our most popular and prestigious exhibition at the Dairy Barn. And every other year when we have it in the summer, there are so many visitors from all over the country, from all over the world, who get to come in and see all these magnificent quilts. And we always get to hear, I wish that I could record some of the comments that visitors make when they're walking around the gallery, because some people don't really know what to expect when seeing Quilt National, and then they are awestruck by the work that they're seeing and the quality of the craftsmanship and the creative use of materials, and it blows them away. So I always love to hear those comments, and I'm trying really hard to get them recorded now so that I can share them with you. But it's a wonderful exhibition, and the call for entry is currently open right now. It's actually open until September 5th. So those of you out there considering entering your quilt into Quilt National, now is the time to do that.
You know, it is just, it's such an incredible thing to see it over time, because it really represents so many of the trends and kind of the advances that were being made in the quilt world, kind of in a little snapshot. And that's one of the things I really love about it.
Yeah, I got to read through all of the past catalogs recently and kind of go through, and it is interesting how history plays out when you read through those catalogs and look at the work that was being made in a particular year. Because one of the restrictions for entry to Quilt National is that it has to be a pretty recent quilt. So it's all art that has been recently created within the last couple of years. And that makes for a really interesting representation of whatever happens to be happening. And so I think last year's show is going to be really interesting to folks in the future, looking back at what the 2021 Quilt National looked like.
Absolutely. Well, that is just a perfect segue, Leah, to our video that we have today, which Marv Fletcher put together for us. And Marvin and his wife, Hillary Fletcher, were, well, Hillary was executive director for many, many years. And so they really lived the history of Quilt National. And so I think this video is just so terrific. Marv actually is also a member of SAQA. He and I served on the SAQA board together, which is when I got to know him. And he's a really special person. And we just appreciate, Marv couldn't be with us today, but we really appreciate that he created this wonderful video for us. So why don't we take a look at that now?
Hi, I'm Marvin Fletcher, and I've been associated with Quilt National for many years, including some of the earliest years. I put together a little presentation about the history of Quilt National. The transition of quilts from an object that was purely functional to something that was purely an art form began in the 1970s. An exhibition in 1971 at the Whitney Museum in New York City, entitled Abstract Design in American Quilts, is often cited as the beginning of this new movement. Shown as a crazy quilt made in the early 20th century, was part of the Whitney exhibition. The Whitney was one of the first museums that displayed quilts vertically, which implied that this was a medium that should be viewed as art. The exhibition encouraged artists who were using this traditional form in ways that were non-traditional. However, for those artists making those non-traditional quilts, there were not a lot of venues that would allow them to display what they were doing. Thus, in 1979, when Athens, Ohio residents Nancy Crow, Francois Barnes, and Virginia Randalls set up an exhibition in a new art space in their hometown, it met a need. However, when these women created what they called Quilt National, they had no thought that this exhibition would endure for many years. The structure of Quilt National was basically set by the creators of the first exhibition. The work that would be displayed must be original work. Those quilts that would be displayed would be chosen through a jury process. Though it was called Quilt National, it would not be limited to American quilters. The materials used in the quilt were not limited to fiber, but could be fiber-like. There would be 3 jurors, 2 of whom would be quilters, while the 3rd juror would have a broad artistic background, such as a museum curator. The jurors would go through the submissions and select the ones that they thought were the best, regardless of size, materials utilized, or methods of construction. The jurors would not view the actual quilts themselves, but rather both a full and a detailed image of the work. While all of this has remained the same over the past 42 years, there have been some modifications and additions. While originally an artist could have more than one work in an exhibition, now each accepted artist is limited to only one piece. While originally the submissions were juried from slides, now they are juried from electronic images. While originally there were no size limitations on the quilts, over the years it has evolved to a limit of 100 inches or 254 centimeters horizontally and vertically. While originally there were no awards given, now there are over 10 awards presented at each show. We will now begin our history with the first Quilt National, held in the summer of 1979. While most of the accepted work were made by female quilters living in the United States, this first group included both non-US artists and male quilters. There were no awards given out at the first Quilt National. The only colored images we have of most of the works in this first Quilt National are the entry slides, which have become bluer over the years. Here are some of the images of what was cutting edge art quilting in 1979. This is a quilt by Rhoda Cohn entitled Main Quilt. It was 193 by 274 centimeters. The artist said, "This quilt was a result of combining a very old technique with some very new ideas of artist Paul Clay." The color of the image is typical of what the images of the 1979 quilts have become over the years. Some of the leaders of what would become the studio art quilt movement had quilts in the first show. On the left is Michael James's Dawn Nebula. When I asked him a few years ago for a better image of the work, he told me that he had no idea where the quilt was. On the right is Nancy Crow's January Study 2, one of 3 quilts that she had in this show. It is 203 by 203 centimeters. This is one of the more controversial quilts from the first show, Cynthia Nixon's Floating Isadora 1 and 2. Each quilt was 101 by 162 centimeters. These 2 quilts are now in the Quilt National collection at the International Quilt Museum at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. The images are also from the museum and an accurate representation of what people saw in the summer of 1979 at the Dairy Barn. Another example of what was the cutting edge of quilt making in 1979 were these 2 quilts by Marjana Urgov. They are entitled Paper Quilt 1 and Paper Quilt 2. Materials included brown bag paper with photo transfers, lace, cord, and lame. 2 years later, the show had grown in the number of entries submitted and displayed. In addition, there were now 3 awards made, which are featured on the next slides. This quilt was given the new Best of Show award. It is 76 by 127 centimeters, and the materials list is quite interesting. Color Xerox on acetate with paper, mylar, and plastic thread. On the left is a quilt by David Horning entitled Pictorial Arrangement. It was given the Award of Excellence. It's made with hand-dyed cotton. On the right is the quilt awarded the most innovative use of the medium. It's entitled The Silter. It's the sitter and was created by Jean Hughes. Included in the materials are silk, crepe, wool, taffeta, and brocade. The artist said, "I do not start out with any sketch or plan in mind for my quilts. I just begin by throwing different fabrics on the floor, feeling how the colors and textures work together. As I continue working with the fabric, shapes and figures begin to suggest themselves." The show continued to grow in terms of the number of quilts submitted and the number of awards granted. One of the changes was that my late wife, Hillary, became the coordinator for Quilt National in 1982. She would continue to fill this role until her death in 2006. Her background was not in the least related to art quilts. She had a master's degree in speech pathology. She did not make quilts, though she did sew. After practicing speech therapy in Athens for about 7 years, she decided to embark on a new but unknown career path. When she visited the first Quilt National, she was blown away by what she saw. She then volunteered to work at the Dairy Barn. She helped with the jury process for Quilt National 81 and continued to volunteer at the Dairy Barn after the show closed. In 1982, the coordinator of Quilt National left and she was offered the position. Under her leadership, the show grew in terms of the number of awards granted, the number of artists entering the competition, the quality of the publications, and the venues where the show would be displayed, in addition to its home base in Athens. On the left is the best of show for 1983. It's quilt number 21 by Pam Studstill. It's 130 by 137 centimeters. It was constructed from hand-painted cotton. On the right is Pauline Burbage's cubic pyramid. It was given an award of excellence, and it was 218 by 203 centimeters and used hand-dyed cottons. On the left is Terry Manget's Fishing Hats over Rose Lake. This received the most innovative use of the medium award. It used cotton blends, rose appliques, sequins, and hats embellished with plastic and rubber worms. On a personal note, when the quilt was received to be hung, Hillary noted that there were only 6 hats, not the 7 that were in the slide that was used to jury the piece into the show. When she asked Terry about this, the artist indicated that she had given away one of the hats. This is noticeable in the image on the right, which was taken during the run of the show at the Dairy Barn. On the left is the Dominique McCarthy Memorial Award. Jean Hughes' Sticks was 201 by 170 centimeters. It was made with rayon, silk, and brocades. On the right is a quilt by Yvonne Porcella. It is entitled Robe for a Dragon Rider. It is an early work by a woman who would become the first president of Studio Art Quilt Associates. It's also an indication that the studio art quilt movement had moved far beyond the association of quilts with bed covers. One of the new awards was the People's Choice Awards. This was voted upon by the visitors to the show. The visitors' choice of this quilt as the most popular is an indication that what the jurors liked and what the visitors liked are never the same. I believe that at the time, many of our visitors were makers of traditional quilts. One such visitor said, "These aren't quilts, this is art." As a result of this point of view, what they liked and voted for were the more traditional quilts at each show. This quilt was made with cottons, blends, velvet, silk, and satin, and is also hand-pieced and hand-quilted. For this Quilt National, I'm going to show you only a few of the award winners. This quilt by Veronica Fitzgerald was chosen Best of Show by the jurors. It has no title. However, it is 427 by 229 centimeters. It led to a clear statement of the maximum size and a strict enforcement of that size limitation. This is a co-recipient of the award for most innovative use of the medium. It was also the first quilt that I ever purchased for our 20th wedding anniversary. Hillary had expressed an interest in the quilt before the show opened, and I bought it as a surprise. When I woke her at 5 a.m. on our wedding anniversary and told her that she was now the owner of this quilt, she could not believe it. This quilt is now returned to the Dairy Barn, as it is in the SAQA show, layered and stitched. The People's Choice Award for this show was given by the attendees to this quilt. which was constructed with cotton and cotton blends. The artist said, "My aim in this quilt was to achieve a sense of three-dimensionality on a flat surface." Over the next decades, the show continued to grow in terms of the number of artists entering and the materials used. I have chosen a few of the prize winners from that period to show the development of the studio art quilt. I always find viewing this quilt from Quilt National 93 to be quite eerie. If you look closely, you can see images of the World Trade Centers in this quilt. It combines Cibachrome photographs, webbing, acetate transparencies, threads, and fabric, and was machine pieced and stitched. You will see later in this presentation that this artist, Arturo Sandoval, continues to make quilts using a wide variety of non-traditional materials. A transparent quilt with a different view depending on which side one viewed it, from 1995. Petra Sosman, the artist, wrote, "Each side of this quilt is always seen through the veil of the image of the other side." The shorthand encryption reads, "Women veil their egos the way men mask their emotions." The quilt was made with natural and synthetic fibers and is 191 by 193 centimeters. If you look at this quilt from Quilt National 97, it appears fairly traditional in design until you realize that each of the little blocks are pieces of pine wood, hand stitched and tied to a fabric background. The quilt was 274 by 274 centimeters. This new award reflected another trend in modern art quilting and was first awarded in 2001. In this Quilt National, the award was given to this Pittsburgh artist, Jan Myers Newberry. The quilt is 140 by 165 centimeters and is cotton muslin fabric, hand dyed using shibori technique. It is machine pieced and machine quilted. The materials in this quilt by Julie Upshaw from 2007 include an ironing board, commercial utility fabric, and whole cloth, which was painted and machine quilted. It is 140 by 41 centimeters. The artist stated, "I feel ambivalent about quilting. Does creative expression in cloth and stitch bring freedom or constraint?" This pair of French quilters have created an image on a whole cloth that uses the ability of modern sewing machines to be maneuvered around the quilt. This incredible piece of work from Quilt National 2007 is 130 by 130 centimeters. John Leffelholtz, who resides in Athens, always stretches the boundaries of materials in his quilts. This 2013 quilt was created with cotton sateen, Da Vinci text, and image designed by the artist and printed by Spoonflower. He added butterflies and hand-stitched the final product. This detail gives you an idea of how John created this image. Quilt artists keep pushing the boundary of what is a quilt. This work by Betty Busby from Quilt National 15 reflects those artists who are using all three dimensions in their work. It's 152 by 51 by 46 centimeters. It was hand painted, stenciled, machine quilted, and hand stitched. She wrote, "I'm revisiting the classical pottery forms of the past, this time in fiber, using the medium to push the traditional shapes in new directions." Another work that pushed the boundaries of quilt making is this piece by Diane Nunez, also from Quilt National 15. It is 86 by 3 centimeters. Listen to the materials in this piece: cotton, fusible stiff interfacing, ink, grommets, rubber O-rings, aluminum tubing, and wooden tinker toys. Brigitte Kopp used the quilt medium as others have done in the past to comment upon a particular cause. In this case, multinational corporations and their role in the political arena. It is interesting that this was the choice of visitors as the most popular quilt in Quilt National 17. The next series of slides are from the 2 most recent Quilt Nationals. This is Dana Zismer's Shapes and Lines 2018, which used hand-dyed and commercial cottons. It was 91 by 152 centimeters in size, and the artist was awarded the Quilts Japan Prize. It's currently sitting in my living room. This is Arturo Sandoval's Pattern Fusion 16 motherboard. He has used digital vinyl, recycled auto industry mylar, recycled University of Kentucky Library microfilm, monofilament threads, holographic and diachronic tapes, 70 millimeter leader film, white glue, and fabric. It's layered, machine stitched, and appliqued. He was awarded the most innovative use of the medium. Like many quilt artists, Mr. Sandoval has expanded his palette with recycled materials, and yet using recycled materials is certainly very traditional in quilt making. This is a quilt by Margarita Koryoff, made by using recycled newspaper, paint, cloth, and threads. It is entitled Orange Blossoms and is 102 by 112 centimeters. It was given the Borgman Award for Surface Design. This is a detail of the quilt, which shows the recycled newspapers. Here's another quilt using recycled materials. It's by Helen Giglio and is constructed from cotton, linen, silk, and white found dress shirts. It's 112 by 119 centimeters in size and was given a Jurors Award. This is a far cry from some of the earliest People's Choices winners. It really shows how much of a change has occurred in the minds of our visitors. It is hand dyed, hand painted, machine pieced, and quilted. We now turn to the most recent Quilt National, shown in Athens in the summer of 2021. This quilt by Kit Vincent, which was best of show, is 140 by 193 centimeters. It was made using cotton, silk, batting, and threads. This quilt by a Dutch artist is 51 by 94 centimeters. Among its materials were cotton and polyester organza, waterproof pencil, and paint sticks. On the left is a quilt by English artist Alicia Merritt. On the right is a 97 by 97 centimeter quilt, one whose materials was toilet paper rolls. As we've examined the history of Quilt National, we have also had a survey of the development of the studio art quilt movement. Over the past more than 40 years, there have been an evolution in the materials used by quilters and the techniques they have employed. The quilts are now both 2- and 3-dimensional. Yet there are many continuities in terms of hand and machine quilting and the use of commercial fabrics. Many of the subjects of the pieces have remained similar, often reflecting the issues of the day. However, the bottom line for me is to be continually amazed and excited by what the artists using this medium of fabric and fabric-like materials have been able to create. I'm looking forward to late May 2023, when I will walk into the dairy barn and take in the new wonders of the 23rd Quilt National.
What a great video by Marv. Sorry for the issues with sound. Thank you, Lucy. Lucy's had some great suggestions in the chat. So if you'd like to listen again on the YouTube channel, there's some great suggestions for that. I just wanted to update everyone now. As you may remember, we did a program on the Quilt National collection here at the International Quilt Museum. And I just wanted to give everyone an update as we are wrapping up that grant funding. Since 2019, we have added 112 new studio quilts from Quilt National to our collection. That joins about 10 or 12 that the Jameses had purchased as they were collecting over the years. So we now have 124 quilts representing Quilt National, and that is one of the most significant collections that we have, because it does represent some of those amazing techniques, amazing quilts that Marv mentioned in his video. Next, we're going to talk to a couple people who are experiencing Quilt National and have shown quilts in Quilt National. And we're going to ask Gul LaPorte to lead that discussion. Gul is a French consultant and author who now lives in Portugal. Gul has lived in many different countries over the last 30 years, but was really inspired in her interest in patchwork and quilting in 1982 when she lived in Houston, Texas. She's written 2 books. She has traveled to many, many exhibitions, done countless magazine articles. She's currently on the board of the International Quilt Museum and a member of SAQA. She also is serving now on a wonderful new committee that Quilt National has established, kind of looking at the program and how it's going to move forward. And she's going to talk to us a bit more about that in a few minutes. But Gul, my dear friend Gul, who I also served on the board with for SAQA, I'm just delighted to have you join us and lead this next segment of our program today.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and I would like first to introduce Linda Colsh, who I have known for 22 years. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce her to you. She has juried and judged major international exhibitions, including Quilt National, and her work has been selected several times. Linda is going to talk about her experience with Quilt National as a juror and the art quilts which were selected and exhibited at Quilt National. Linda.
Thank you, Gul. Yes, I am going to talk today a little bit about quilts from the perspective of the artists that enter. And I recall back in the day, the wait times that we had. You would take your work to a photographer, have it photographed, and then wait till the slides were ready. Then you would go pick up your slides, bring them home, fill out the paperwork, real paperwork, not online paperwork, put it in an envelope with the slides, put a stamp on it, and in my case, mailing it from Europe. So I had to get it in way ahead of time. And then you would wait and wait until it came back. And what you would get back was, as we used to talk about it, either a fat envelope or a skinny envelope. And I got my share of skinny envelopes over the years. I don't even know if people these days, younger artists know the difference between fat and skinny envelopes, because now you upload your images and you get an email and you open the email and you can't tell from the line in your inbox whether it's going to be a fat envelope or a skinny envelope. This piece, the quilt that's on the screen now, is the first piece I ever got into Quilt National with. It was extremely exciting to open that envelope. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, gosh, this piece is going to be hanging in the dairy barn where so many of my heroines and heroes have had their work hanging in the past, and I'm going to have my work there. And this, I considered this work transitional. It's not the people that I would eventually become known for, but it is screen printing. And my palette is beginning to move on from full spectrum, full color wheel quilts to one color plus black. We can go to the next slide. This is the second piece that I had in Quilt National. This was 2007 when that was juried in. And this one stretches almost to the 100-inch limit. This is 98 inches tall. But this is where I've begun to really get into my stride with screen printing the people that I've been taking through my street photography. And my palette is really edging towards quite neutral. Can we have the next slide? And this was the third piece that I had in Quilt National, excuse me. And at this point, I really felt like, gosh, now I can swim with a big fish. This is a piece that is about a mystery and a mystery writer, Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie disappeared from northern part of the UK for 11 days. Nobody knew where she was. And then several years later, she went to Istanbul, and apparently, you can Google this, apparently she put a key under the floorboards of room 411 of the Para Palace Hotel, which I fortunately got to visit. And the key was apparently to a diary that explains the 11-day missing period in her life. If we can go to the next slide. This is a piece that represents my jurying experience. I don't believe the jurors actually have quilts in the show the year that they jury. I was jurying with Judith Content and Penny McMorris for Quilt National 2013. And this piece, actually, just a digression, this piece was in a show the following year, the special show at the Dairy Barn, which celebrated the 100th anniversary of the building of the Dairy Barn. And for that, the Quilt National organizers invited all the previous artist jurors from all the years that there's been a Quilt National. They invited them all to send a first quilt, a last quilt, and a quilt from the year they juried. This is the year that I juried. This quilt represents the year that I juried. And my jurying experience was quite interesting because this was the first all digital entry year. Before this, it was always slides or CDs, or maybe they sent floppy disks. I don't remember ever sending one, but maybe we did. But this year, we all also had the first round of jurying remotely. And we had like 850 some odd quilts that year. So I was quite pleased to have all the time at home to be able to jury that first round. And then after the first round, the results were tabulated, and the three of us went to Athens, Ohio, and met. We sat in front of a large video screen upstairs at the Dairy Barn above the exhibition space. And we juried round after round after round. And I have to say, even though Penny and I and Judith had known each other for a long time, we agreed on some, we disagreed on others, we discussed a lot, and we deliberated to come up with the 85 pieces that ended up in the show. And I'd like to close by mentioning, I was so pleased to see it in Marv's talk again. I just want to mention that each juror gets to put a little bit of a personal stamp on their jury work by selecting a juror's choice award. And my choice that year was John Leffelholtz's Mona in the Age of Social Butterflies. And I still to this day love that quilt so much. Thanks a lot. I think there's one more piece. Is there one? Yes, this piece is currently at the Dairy Barn, and this piece is in the Layered and Stitch show, which is the SAQA retrospective show of the art of the art quilt. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Now it's my pleasure and honor to introduce you to Dr. Carolyn Mazloomi. She's amongst the most influential African-American quilt historians and quilt artists from both the 20th and 21st century. A former aerospace engineer, Dr. Mazloomi has been involved in the economic development of women through art for more than 20 years. In 1985, she founded the Women of Color Quilters Network, which includes also men, to promote inclusiveness of African-American quilt making. Dr. Mazloomi has created an inspiring body of work, much of it referencing African-American life and history. She has also published many books, among them Spirits of the Cloth, Threads of Faith and Textural Rhythms, Quilting the Jazz Tradition. Recently, she joined the Quilt National Committee and will be one of the jurors for Quilt National 23. She will explain how the committee views the future of Quilt National and what changes the committee would like to implement to make Quilt National a better exhibition and a better experience for textile artists.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit about the committee that Quilt National has formed. Quilt National continues always to evolve and develop the art quilt. And now the committee, formed of 5 members, has come up with a series of steps in order to further continue that evolution of quilt making. The first thing that the committee plans to do is engage more audiences, broaden that audience. We're going to do that by publicizing the Quilt National events on the internet and in various articles, by also engaging various organizations as well to expand the number of admissions for Quilt National. And we are engaging in partnership strategies with museums such as the International Quilt Museum, organizations such as SAQA and the Modern Quilt Guild, as well as large quilt guilds and textile organizations, not only here in this country, but abroad as well. The committee has translated the call for entry into several languages, and Gul will speak about that a little bit later. And we are starting to make plans already for the production of the catalog. And I always look forward to the Quilt National catalog because the photography is just absolutely spectacular. So for those that don't go to or are unable to go and see the actual exhibition, it's a good way to keep in touch with what's going on in the contemporary or the arts community by seeing that catalog. So we've already started reviewing the changes for the prospectus for the 2005 exhibition. And we're still evolving as a group. And our number one objective is to do whatever we can to keep things moving with Quilt National to continue to make it one of, well, not only this country, but the world's premier exhibition of contemporary quilts. Go.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think you described it very well, you know, what we are aiming to. I can say that I'm a little bit a specialist of international relation, you know, so I can say that the first time that Quilt National had an exhibition in Europe, it was in France, and it was at the European Patchwork Meeting. And since then, I think that it's sort of, you know, of tradition. Every other year, Quilt National is invited to to show some of the quilts there, but this is not enough, and we need to have that, increased. And this is why it was fantastic to have the prospectus translated, so people can't have any excuse anymore saying, well, I have the language barrier, I don't know how to read it. So we have it in French, in German, in Spanish, in Italian, in Japanese, and the South Korean, and in Dutch. So I think which is perhaps I exaggerate for one or two, but it's okay, So this, I think, will help a lot people about that. And today when I was looking, people who are participating to this textile talk, I noticed that we have people from Switzerland, from Scotland, from UK, from South Africa, from Mauritius. So I think it shows how much people are interested in Quilt National, and we really need to do the most we can just to increase that interest, not only in the United States, but around the world, and particularly, I believe, in Asia also.
You ladies are absolutely right. And I think the committee and the formation of the committee was really important step for the Dairy Barn. I think we've had committees in the past, and I think it's important that we have Quilt National committees moving forward, because when we as an organization sat down to attempt to dream about the future of Quilt National, what we realized is that our dreams are going to be much bigger and much more relevant with a committee of experts also dreaming with us. And I think that's really what the committee is about and can help with, because if we decide to make all of our decisions about Quilt National in a silo, then we're speaking for an awful lot of artists out there that aren't being represented in our conversation. And so we're really trying to expand that network to try to make sure that the people who could potentially be interested in Quilt National, both visiting and viewing it, and submitting their work to it as artists, or coming and learning about it even, that they feel welcome to the table and they have access and the information that they need, and they know how to participate. And so the committee's been really wonderful, and I thank both of you for being a part of helping us dream about the future of Quilt National. It's really spectacular.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. We try to do our best anyway.
Well, and Gul and Carolyn, you had some special news to share with us today.
Yes, I think it's Carolyn who has a special news to share, not me, and it's fantastic news.
So Carolyn.
Yes, I just had 3 of my quilts purchased by the Smithsonian, by the African American Museum at the Smithsonian. So I'm so happy for that. And I'm very proud. I'm very proud to say now that I have quilts in 3 Smithsonian museums. So for me, that's quite an honor. I'm quite pleased.
Well, I think, Carolyn, that is just so important. I think it shows that the Smithsonian is looking at quilts again. We haven't seen a lot of growth in the Smithsonian collection, and I'm hoping that this really kind of is a signal that they are really going to be embracing some of the really amazing work that's being done today.
I think things are changing. They're changing for museums around the world, because now museums see quilts as works of art, as they've always been. So it's a new day when it comes to collecting, because we have more and more museums every day that decide to add quilts to their permanent collection. So it's a win-win situation for quilts across the board.
It really is. And, it's been something that all of our organizations, all of the people that are sponsors, everyone has hoped to see this development. And I really am seeing those signs that it's coming now, and that we're really being embraced by the larger art world. And that's a real thrill for everyone.
Truly.
I do have just a couple of questions that I thought we could address. And Leah, Leah is not the executive director of the Quilt National exhibition, which I keep saying, but I'm hoping maybe, Leah, that you can just give us some more information, or perhaps we can put a link up to how the jurying process goes. People are curious both about being accepted into Quilt National, but also how the jurors are selected for Quilt National.
Yeah, I saw the question in the Q&A, and it's a good one. And I can't speak to the full history of Quilt National. It is the dairy barn that makes the end decision about who the jurors are. And there's a lot that goes in to that particular decision, as well as making sure that we have sort of a multifaceted and dimensional, if you will, jury that can work together from several different perspectives, bring those perspectives to the table. For this, for the next jury that will be selected, we are looking to our committee to make those recommendations. So we're pulling from experts in the field to recommend other experts in the field to help us make that decision. But every year, there's different things that come up. We do take you as the artists' opinions pretty seriously. So if there's something in particular that you want to see represented on a jury, by all means, reach out to us at the Dairy Barn. Send me an email, which I can put in the chat. But I love to hear your perspective, because that's what Quilt National is about, right? For the jurying process, I can also in a moment put the link to our prospectus, which goes over all of the details for how to submit, what the qualifiers are, all of that, because I saw some of those questions happening. It is 100 inches is the limit, for example. Any bigger than that, it's kind of hard to fit on our walls. It's more about hanging than.
I think Lucy got that link in the chat for anyone who does want to explore that. And how many, I know that I was the juror in 2019, and I think we looked at more than 800 entries, but how many are actually selected for the exhibition ultimately?
Yeah, 84, 86, somewhere around there is how many quilts can be accepted. It's been a little different year to year, but that's pretty standard. So yeah, lots of quilts.
And then from the Dairy Barn, the show travels quite extensively.
It does, yes. So once it has its debut at the Dairy Barn, we then break the collection up into 3 different collections, which we very creatively call collection A, B, and C. And those collections do travel pretty extensively. So we, lend it out to other galleries, museums, organizations all over the place, with the mission of making sure that the fantastic work continues to be shown for 2 years after Quilt National comes to an end at the Dairy Barn. And so helping with artists getting their quilts out there and viewed and admired is a huge part of what Quilt National is about. And a lot of that does happen in the traveling process.
It's kind of amazing because Quilt National never stops, because you're traveling constantly, and then you're working towards the next iteration of it. It's really daunting. I have to say that the jurying process was so fascinating. When you have that number of quilts, you would think it's overwhelming, but you guys have such a great process for we jurors that help us kind of break it down. So I found it fascinating, and I really enjoyed the fact that there were 3 jurors, and that it's a lot about that back and forth between the jurors, and that you stand up for those pieces, you fight for those pieces that you really are passionate about. But we have some terrific kind of interplay, and ultimately, I think with my group, at least, we came to a great final decision.
Yeah, I love those conversations. So sorry to interrupt you, Carolyn. I love hearing those conversations when a jury gets together. I always learn so much, whether it's Quilt National or our photography exhibition wide open, or whatever the jury is. It's so interesting to hear different artists' perspectives on why they're drawn to the things that they're drawn to and how they assess the work and work together to come to a conclusion. It's really fun and fascinating.
It is.
Absolutely.
Well, I just want to open this up to the rest of our panel. We have just a minute or two left. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add before we close out for today?
Well, I think that I recommend highly also if people can visit also on the site, the exhibition, the Quilt National is fantastic. I discovered that there and I was mouth open, and that's when I decided, you know, oh, this has to travel and we have to do something about it. It's so beautifully displayed always. Really, I warmly recommend people to go and see it on site at the quilt, at the dairy barn. It's really worth it.
There is nothing more fun than that opening event when artists come in and see their work hanging and they have an opportunity to talk about their work and have a video taken of it. I think that is just an amazing event. So, well, Carolyn Mazloomi, I just want to congratulate you again. You are doing so much to really to build the quilt world and to just facilitate so many things that are happening moving forward. And we didn't even touch on so many of those things today. Thank you so much, Linda Colsh. We are so excited to be adding a number of your pieces from Quilt National to the International Quilt Museum collection. That is a thrill for us. And it has just been just one of the highlights of my career to work on this, the building of this collection, because I think it's so significant. So thank you everyone for being here today, and do look for this program on YouTube and join us again next week for the next Textile Talk. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
play our
you.
sponsorship slide so everybody knows. And I will, you know, that video at the beginning was not our video, but I can try to clean it up, that sound, before we publish it on YouTube for anybody who's interested. So I'm gonna go ahead
Thanks,
and play
Haley.
our sponsors. And looks like, as a reminder, the next week's Textile Talk will be Quilt Making and Sustainability, a virtual exhibition with Laura Hopper, presented by the Quilt Alliance. And because you were attending today, you'll get an email with a link to register for that program. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.